guys, welcome back. And you know what? There's actually been a lot of new people around here lately. Most of them saying that I should cover this game or that game, and half the time I've already covered them. So I figured this week I could give you all a little bit of catch up with every Super NES game that we've covered so far, just in case you maybe missed a video. Also, I'm kind of working on something and need just a little bit more time to get it done. And if you stick around to the end of this video, I'll let you know what it is. But we got a whole lot of games to get through first, so let's get it started. Firestryker for the Super NES definitely takes the crown for unique twist on a game genre. For those of you that don't know, I'm from the Retrovaniacs podcast, which, hey, if you want to listen to a great podcast, then be sure to check us out on your favorite podcast apps. But anyway, back to this game. We covered it back in 2019, and it ended up being one of the most interesting games we had covered up until then. I had never even heard of this one, and when I sat down to play it, well, it definitely wasn't what I was expecting. At first glance, Firestryker looks like it's gonna be your typical JRPG game, complete with story and overhead map screen. But as soon as you enter a level, things take a turn. Initially, you might think of this as more like an action RPG, but you quickly learn it's anything but as you start smashing an energy ball across the screen, bouncing it around off walls and enemies' faces. If that sounds more like a pinball game, well, you're partly right. This is like a weird mix of pinball and Breakout, neither of which you would think fits into the RPG theme of this game. Yes, it is a weird combination, but once you wrap your head around it, you start to realize that it actually works really well. Your objective for most levels is to simply hit the energy ball into obstacles enough times to destroy them, letting you progress by getting the ball through the top of the screen, or by hitting switches around the map. You'll need to clear a few screens to beat a level, with each one getting trickier and trickier to navigate, all while you try to keep from running into enemies and at the same time keeping the energy ball from destroying your own defenses, ultimately leading to you losing a life if the ball passes through to the bottom of the screen. You do get a little help in the form of a wizard that stands at the bottom of the screen that'll deflect the ball if it gets too close, but otherwise it's all on your energy ball skills to clear each screen. Sometimes having to even fight bosses with this thing, which is easier said than done. It's a really fun gimmick that works surprisingly well. And there's enough variety in the stages and the stuff you unlock to keep the game fresh for way longer than you'd think. Like how you initially only have a pretty standard striker, which is the guy you play as. But as you go along, you can unlock different strikers that all have their own strengths and weaknesses. It's just a fun little weird game overall. It kind of reminds me of those old TurboGrafx 16 games that would randomly put an RPG into something like a tennis game or something. But I think Firestryker is a far better example of mixing two different styles of game into something that feels cohesive and fun. So if you're like me and had never even heard of Firestryker, then give this one a shot. I'm usually not a fan of stuff like this at all, but I think Firestryker is more than worth bouncing your energy balls around on. The Firemen for the Super NES is one of those games that I can't believe that we didn't get here in the US. Now, I'm not sure if the developers of this game felt that the ignition factor had completely saturated the Western market in Fireman-based action games on the Super NES, but for whatever reason, the Fireman was only released in Japan and European territories. And that's a damn shame, because this is a really fun action game with a unique twist on things. Yes, this is an overhead action game where the main source of action involves you slowly moving through areas and extinguishing mostly non-moving patches of fire. And while that probably isn't as exciting as it first sounds, the Fireman does a great job of constantly putting you in new situations and environments that keeps the extinguishing feeling fresh. You even get an AI partner that, believe it or not, actually does a really good job at helping you instead of constantly getting in the way. And before you ask, no, this game sadly isn't co-op, even though it definitely looks like it is. The computer-controlled partner is just that, only computer-controlled. The other thing that really helps the Firemen stand out is just how good of a job it does in making you feel like you're in an 80s action movie. There's definite Die Hard vibes here, as a standard fire quickly turns into something much crazier, as two very dedicated firemen get deeper and deeper into the building as the whole situation just snowballs. Oh, and if the Die Hard vibes weren't already strong enough, it just so happens to take place during Christmas as well, and that's always the best time for any action movie to take place. There's even full-on set-piece action here as windows explode and entire floors drop out from underneath you. It really comes together to feel like you're watching a really good straight-to-VHS action movie that you'd randomly rent at the video store when nothing better was in. The seriousness and tone of it all, well, it's just kind of charming as all hell. There's really not too much wrong with this one either. The action can definitely be a bit slow and plotting, but I mean really there's only so much you can do to make fire into a viable video game enemy. The game's also incredibly short, weighing in at just maybe like a couple of hours to get through on your first playthrough, but by far the biggest problem with this game is that it didn't come over here to the West, and I just don't get that reasoning at all. It was already completely translated for the European release, so all it needed was a publisher to distribute it here. And for all the absolute crap that was flooding shelves back then just because publishers wanted to get in on that hot Super NES action, I'm not sure how a totally solid game like the Firemen was completely looked over. Thankfully though, it is pretty easy to play these days thanks to emulation, and I totally think you should check it out if you haven't. It's a really great action game, and one that's worth going out of your way to play. Jurassic Park on the Super NES is definitely the most unique Jurassic Park game on 16-bit consoles. While the Sega Genesis went for the more traditional side-scrolling run-and-gun style action game, the first Jurassic Park game on the Super NES decided to go for something entirely different. Instead of the non-stop action, Jurassic Park on the Super NES is more of an adventure game at first, with a top-down view that looks like something out of Legend of Zelda rather than Jurassic Park. And it honestly kind of plays like that too, as you explore the island, trying to make your way through the maze-like sections of the park while unlocking doors and finding ways to access new areas as you fend off dinos with your limited arsenal of weapons. To say this is not what I expected out of a Jurassic Park game on the Super NES is an understatement. This was such a weird thing to jump into back when I first rented it. But don't worry, because it's actually about to get even weirder. As you explore the park, you'll come across buildings that you need to access so that you can progress. But as soon as you go in, you're treated to a complete shift in perspective as you're met with a first-person shooter on the Super NES. Yes, while it is very basic looking, it's at least functional, though moving can definitely feel more like you're navigating the halls in a semi-truck, and lining up shots is way more difficult than it should be. But once you get the hang of it, you can generally make your way around without too much of an issue. While inside, you need to do your standard first-person shooter game thing of finding your way through corridors, locating keys, and then opening locked doors with said keys. The slow pace of these areas kinda works in the game's favor, since the tension is definitely amped up as you're slowly making your way around corners just to have a raptor jump out at your face and cause you to scream like a little girl. Now, I'm not saying something like that happened to me. I mean, it kinda did, but just don't be surprised if it happens to you too. It also doesn't hurt that the sound in this game is one of the few games on the system that's actually surround sound capable. So if you have the equipment, you'll be crapping your pants as you can hear dinosaurs behind you before you can even do a full 9-point turn to see them. There's a lot to like about Jurassic Park on the Super NES. It's so different that it's kinda hard not to like. It does have one big problem though, at least if you're playing this on the Super NES. There's no way to save your game, not even one of those screen-filling passwords that we used to get. The game literally expects you to beat it in one sitting, and this isn't a short game the first time through. Now, this isn't an issue if you're playing on an emulator since you can just save state your way through, but that doesn't excuse why the actual cart doesn't let you save your game. It's kinda crazy. But that's really the worst of it. If you've never played Jurassic Park on the Super NES, then this is definitely worth checking out due to just how weird it is. Games like this just didn't exist back then, so sitting down to it back then was just a complete experience. And honestly, it's still just as good of an experience these days if you're a fan of Jurassic Park or just like unique adventure games in general. this is one weird Jurassic Park game that's well worth your time. Spike McFang for the Super NES was one of the weirdest games that I ever played on the system. For as many games that never got a release in the US due to Western publishers concerned that they wouldn't translate to us barbaric children in the West, Bulletproof Software did not blink an eye at bringing possibly one of the strangest Japanese games on the system over here. Conceptually, Spike McFang is completely insane. You play as the son of Dracuman as you roll around trying to defeat the evil zombie Van Helsing, who's trying to take over Spike McFang's kingdom. You do this by essentially rolling around in the most busted up hoopty I've ever seen in a video game as you protect your kingdom from such horrific evil as cat girls and onions. I mean, what else can you really say about this? Thankfully, Spike McFang has a bit more going for it beyond just pure insanity. The gameplay is essentially a top-down action game with a little bit of an RPG packed in. Spike can level up and gain new abilities through a card system that you can purchase at shops. But for the most part, you'll be using Spike's trusty cape spin to attack enemies. But just don't use it too much or he'll get dizzy and fall over, like any good video game hero would. He can also toss his hat across the screen to hit enemies that his spin attack can't reach, which can be fun to use as a sort of hat boomerang thing. Beyond that though, there's really not too much going on here. This is a pretty simple action game for the most part that really relies more on its overall charm to keep you going than gameplay variety. And as a kid, I mean, it worked for me at least. There is a cool thing that really isn't advertised on the box or anything, but after the first area, you gain an AI partner that follows you around. The cool thing is that if a second player picks up the controller, then you've got a full-on co-op game going. It just sucks that you gotta play 2 hours or so in before you even get the ability to do so. Still though, it's a really neat addition to the game. And I think that's the best way to describe Spike McFang. I just think it's neat. It's a fun little game that obviously doesn't take itself seriously in the least. The over-the-top silliness of the story and the fun cartoon look of the game really endeared itself to me and my cousin when we rented this one back in the day. In fact, this is the game that made me start looking for more Japanese-style games on the Super NES, once I learned that that's why this game seems so different. In fact, you may have actually seen this one back in the day if you remember the absolutely horrible box art that this game has. And I'll be honest, I almost didn't pick it up due to just how bad this looks. It just sucks how many kids probably never gave this game a chance due to, well, this. And if you did pass it up back then do yourself a favor and give Spike a shot. It's a fun but definitely weird Super NES action RPG, and hell, it's just hard not to like Spike. The Peacekeepers for the Super NES is a pretty awesome beat-em-up that just never got the attention that it deserved. This is actually the third in a trilogy of beat-em-ups by Jaleco that started with the not-so-great rival Turf on the Super NES, which is only really notable for its so embarrassing that it's good box art. This was followed up by Brawl Brothers, and that's a game that definitely came home with me a lot from the video store. Oh, and just a little bit of trivia, Brawl Brothers was actually the very first review that I did on this channel nearly 10 years ago. But the final game in the series is The Peacekeepers, and well, we probably need to talk a little bit more about that one. First off, you can't talk about The Peacekeepers without mentioning the absolute insane amount of story in this one. Someone at Jaleco really wanted to tell you a story in this game, which, may I remind you, is a beat-em-up, a game that usually doesn't feature story-heavy moments simply because these games are just all about jumping in and beating people up. You generally don't want to sit around and read minutes worth of text just to move forward in these kinds of games. It doesn't help that the story is also pretty badly translated, with a lot of it being just unintentionally hilarious. So unless you're into drunkenly laughing at bad translations in video games, get ready to skip a lot of plot text in this one. Once you get past that though, you're left with a pretty decent beat-em-up. Of course, you get to pick from a ragtag group of heroes with each one playing surprisingly different from each other. Flynn's your totally standard guy that isn't too weak, isn't too strong, and isn't too fast, but he is perfectly good at beating dudes up. Echo's the girl that can do cool jump kicks and stuff, because, that's what girls in video games do. Al's kind of the muscle with some of the slower moves, though he kind of just looks like he wandered out of a Walmart hunting section. And finally, Pro Cop is here to be the most annoying of the bunch, since his standard attacks are so slow that enemies can actually hit you in the middle of a combo. At least he does have this cool fire-breathing move that can clear the area, and he also gets up off the floor like The Undertaker, so I guess that's kinda cool. The branching stages are also pretty neat, letting you choose completely different paths through some of the stages, which definitely helps mix things up on multiple playthroughs, since depending on which path you choose, you can have a very different experience each time you play. Besides all of that though, this is still your pretty standard brawler. But standard or not, the Peacekeepers is still the best of the bunch when it comes to this trilogy, and it's an awesome addition to the Switch library. It's a lot of fun just to grab a friend and mindlessly beat your way through the game. Oh wait, I'm sorry, peacekeep your way through the game. There's enough variety in the stages and the enemies to keep it from getting too stale, and no stage seems to go on longer than it should, which is a big deal in a beat-em-up game. About the only real complaint that I have with the game besides the plot elements is that there's no music in the game by default. Yes, if you want to listen to music in the Peacekeepers, you actually need to go into the menu before you start the game and turn the music on, unless you just want to peacekeep in silence. And who wants to really do that in a beat-em-up? But if you're paying for Switch Online and haven't played the Peacekeepers yet, then do us Rush and Beat Trilogy fans proud by keeping the peace with this awesome Super NES brawler. The ignition factor for the Super NES is one of the most unique games on the Switch Super NES library. In the previous video, I mentioned how the Firemen was the definitive fireman-based action game on the Super NES, and I still think it definitely is. But where the Firemen was all about bombastic action movie set pieces and dialogue, the ignition factor goes in a completely different direction, with a game that's closer to a strategy game than an action game. You can definitely see that things are going to be a little bit different as soon as you start the game and are greeted with a full-on briefing of the fire that you're about to deal with. You'll be given a rundown of the situation, including the different types of dangers that you may come across, and the time limit that you'll have to get the job done. After that, you'll be taken into an inventory screen where you'll need to select different tools for the job, but you can't take everything or you'll be slowed to a crawl. You can even select which entrance you'd like your fire truck to drop you off at, and I just think that's pretty neat. And if you're thinking that all of this sounds like a lot for a game that's based around putting out fires, well, you're right. But I love this kind of planning before a mission starts in a game. It really gets you invested in the mission that you're about to do. Speaking of that mission, you'll be dropped off at the entrance that you chose, and then it's up to you to make your way through each building to save the survivors before the time runs out. You do get a basic map showing where survivors are, but getting through the maze-like areas is the main challenge of the game. The fire itself is more of just like an inconvenience than anything, since your main challenge is to find the survivors and get out before the time runs out. To do so, you'll need to use your items you choose before the mission to make your way through to get them. Navigating things like blocked doors that need to be knocked down with your axe, or blown up with explosives, or even different types of fires that require different tanks to extinguish. Thankfully, if you happen to bring the wrong stuff in the briefing, there's usually another firefighter just kinda standing around to let you switch some stuff out. The survivors themselves can also be a hassle, with some of them having special requests before they allow you to not let them die in a fire. Plus, there's even side missions for you to do so you can access certain areas that you couldn't get to before. It's definitely a lot to deal with, but it really comes together in an incredibly addictive game if you're into planning and executing a strategy to get through all of this. Especially since bad planning will ultimately lead to you just running out of time or just burning to death on the floor. And if all that sounds like your kind of thing, then give Ignition Factor a chance on the Switch. This is a great addition to the Super NES library, and one that can offer a ton of replayability if you want to try to get all the survivors in each run. It's a really unique game, and it's definitely the only fireman simulator on the system that I know of. But I will admit that it's probably not for everyone. The planning aspect and slower pace of the game definitely isn't going to be your thing if you're expecting more of an action game. And if you want that, then you can just go play the Firemen. But if the slower paced, more strategic game sounds like that's your thing, then definitely check out the Ignition Factor on the Switch. Joe and Mac 2 for the Super NES is a great sequel that maybe waited a little bit too long to come out originally. Obviously, the original Joe and Mac is an all-time classic with its crazy caveman platforming adventures, especially when it hit the Super NES back in 1991. The large character sprites and awesome prehistoric setting really showed off what the Super NES was capable of in its early years. Of course, any game that does that well is gonna get a sequel, and a few years later, we finally got Joe and Mac 2. And this one is definitely more Joe and Mac. Shocking, I know. But that's not really a bad thing. You play as Joe and or Mac as you make your way through multiple levels that span every video game level stereotype that you can imagine. Like the forest level and the fire level. All kidding aside though, these derivative levels usually have at least one cool section that has you doing stuff like running from massive dinosaurs or even barely dodging a lava flow in the belly of a volcano. There's even usually a rideable dinosaur in each stage that lets you stomp or fly around the level while you're on its back. Though it usually doesn't last too long since like one hit will send your dino friend to the grave. Still, it's pretty cool stuff and every level at least feels unique, even though they all seem to come from Video Game Blueprint document number 367. Besides the levels though, not much else has changed in the gameplay department, besides Joe and Mac getting a lot of stuff that they can just eat this time around. At first you may think that they're just health pickups, which they are, but each one gives you a unique spitting ability, like being able to spit bones if you eat a piece of meat, or even being able to put out fires if you gulp a bunch of water down. It's nothing game-changing, but it is fun to take cavemen out by spitting stuff at them. Especially since everything seems to take way more hits this time than the first game did. The biggest reason that Joe and Mac 2 fell by the wayside when it first came out wasn't because it was a bad game, but more because it took a full 3 years to come out. And that was an eternity back then for a sequel to hit shelves if your name wasn't Squaresoft or Enix. By the time Joe and Mac 2 finally came out, no one really seemed to care, which is understandable due to just the sheer number of platform games already littering store shelves by then. So if you're like a lot of kids that missed out on Joe and Mac 2 when it first released, you've now got a chance these days to play a really fun platformer on the Switch. I still think it's a really solid game with a lot of character and humor to it, and this is also another great co-op game as well. So if you're one of those lucky people that has, friends, grab one and beat some cavemen up together. It may not be the most unique or genre-defining game on the Switch Super NES library, but Joe and Mac 2 is still a great dino-bashing time, even if it was never quite as popular as the first game was. Wild Guns for the Super NES is an incredible gem of a game that hardly anyone ever mentions anymore. Wild Guns was one of those games that was released kinda late in the Super NES's lifespan, with little fanfare around it. It just kinda showed up one day with barely any previews in magazines for it. And it's a real shame because this is one of the best games on the system. Basically, if you ever played anything like G.I. Joe in the arcade, then I think you know what you're getting here. Wild Guns is essentially a shooting gallery type game, where you can move your character left and right while lining up your cursor to shoot enemies spawning all over the background. The real challenge comes in trying to keep track of all the enemies spawning in, and prioritizing which ones to take out first, and making sure you're dodging their attacks by using your dodge. It sounds simple, but it can get hectic really quick if you let things get out of hand. Though you do have some more powerful weapons that you can shoot and pick up that can even the odds against the masses a bit. Each stage has multiple sections that you need to make it through to progress, with each one featuring some very different challenges. From larger open area stages where it seems like enemies are coming at you from everywhere, to smaller, more compact areas where the danger is just how fast you can dodge. You even get the classic Western level where you're protecting a train, and it's just as cool here as it is in the movies. What really sets Wild Guns apart though is its presentation. While you may immediately be able to tell that this is a Western-themed game, which was almost non-existent back then by itself, it's also got this weird sci-fi steampunk thing going for it that just really blew me away back in the day. Everything looks like it's been cobbled together using weird machinery with full-on robots interacting with characters and settings straight out of a Western. Natsume did an incredible job with this one, making what could arguably be one of the best-looking games on the Super NES. Even coming back to it for this video, I couldn't believe how well this game still holds up. It just looks incredible. And if you're like me and just a fan of pixel art in general, then please check Wild Guns out just for the graphics alone. This is a masterclass in that area. When I saw Wild Guns was announced for the Nintendo Switch Online, I was so happy that this one could finally maybe get the attention that it deserved. It's still a blast to play today, and I totally recommend you check it out, except for the fact that Wild Guns got an even better remaster on the Switch already, with Wild Guns Reloaded. And honestly, I think that's probably the version that you should play. It takes everything that's great about Wild Guns and remasters it beautifully for modern TVs. Wild Guns already looked spectacular on the Super NES, but seeing it in 1080p with widescreen support makes it feel like it was made for this. But if you still want to check out the OG on NSO, then by all means do so. It's still super fun and one of the best co-op games on the service. But no matter which version you decide to play, I can guarantee that you'll have a rootin' tootin' good time with this futuristic Western shooting gallery. Magical Quest for the Super NES was the game that I was looking forward to the most. I was a huge fan of Capcom Disney games on the NES, with some of my favorite games on the console being stuff like Chip and Dale's Rescue Rangers and of course DuckTales. Capcom could literally do no wrong in my eyes on that system. So when I finally got my Super NES and was seeing previews of Capcom's first game on the system, I was pretty excited. The previews of it looked so good, and if Capcom's previous pedigree was anything to go by, well, we were in for a treat. And for the most part, yeah, this is a pretty fun Capcom Disney game. First impressions are obviously the graphics. I mean, just look how gorgeous this game is. And you gotta remember that we were going from a game that looked like this to something that looked like this. It was an incredible jump in just about every single way. The characters were huge and well animated, and the backgrounds all looked like they came straight out of a Disney cartoon. It was really something to behold back then. And honestly, if you ask me, it still looks pretty good these days too. And while I don't think anyone will argue that this isn't a great looking Super NES game, playing the game is generally where people, well, let's just say, have some opinions. Magical Quest is definitely a platform game. I mean, I think you can kind of see that. And from just playing the first stage, you may think you're going to be in for a neat little game where the gimmick is that Mickey can pick up the boxes scattered around each level and just toss them at enemies, which is pretty fun on its own. But once you get past that initial level, well, the game kind of throws a curveball at you, starts giving Mickey magical outfits that he can change into, with each one giving him an entirely different set of abilities to use, like being able to blast enemies with magic while wearing a magic turban, or just straight up turning him to a fireman with the fireman outfit, letting you put out fires with your fire hose. The problem is that these costumes just keep coming at you every level, so you never really get to settle into a comfort zone with any of them. By the time you get the hang of moving blocks around with your fire hose, well, it's time to throw that outfit out the window and instead swing around like Bionic Commando with the mountaineering outfit. And each stage, up until the end of the game anyway, really only favors one outfit. It kind of seems like the game's building to you being able to switch back and forth between them all once you collect them. But instead, you only get like one stage to really experiment with them all, and then the game's over. The outfits are definitely fun to use, but you just never get much time with them since the game's so short. Still though, if you've never played Magical Quest, I think you're in for a good time here. Is it a perfect game? I mean, no, it's not even in the top 5 of best Capcom Disney games. But it's still a really good platformer, and it's a lot of fun while it lasts. At the very least, the constant stream of new abilities keeps the game feeling fresh, but just don't expect the game to last for long enough for you to actually really get good at any one of them. In the end though, while this game may not be as magical as Capcom's NES games were, I still think this is one magical quest that's well worth taking on the Super NES. Goof Troop for the Super NES is probably the most unique Capcom Disney game that they ever made. This is one that I just never played as a kid, mainly because I wasn't a fan of Goof Troop or really anything involving Goofy. He just wasn't my thing. So I wasn't really looking at this one too hard when it hit my video store, especially when the back of the box made it look more like a top-down action game than my tried-and-true Disney platformers that I usually played. But man, I kinda wish I would've just taken a chance and rented it, because it turns out Goof Troop is actually really fun. As soon as you start the game, you can tell that this one's gonna be a little bit different from your standard Disney game. Each stage is like a top-down maze that almost feels like a little mini Zelda dungeon, with multiple paths leading to different items and puzzles that you need to solve to make it to the end. You even have to collect a boss key that you can unlock the boss room just like a dungeon in Zelda. But really, that's mainly where the comparisons to Zelda end, and Goof Troop just kinda starts doing its own thing. Goofy, of course, doesn't have a direct attack, since it would be kinda weird to see Goofy walking around stabbing pirates with a sword, so Capcom's brought back the tried-and-true box-tossing mechanic from Chip and Dale on the NES. Goofy can pick up anything that isn't too heavy off of the ground and just throw it at enemies, causing them to hilariously blast off the screen just like in Chip and Dale. And yes, it's still just as satisfying here as it was in that game. Beyond laying waste to pirate goons, you'll need to use the various items that are scattered around each stage to make your way through them, like the grapple hook that you'll need to create rope bridges with, or just finding planks to bridge other gaps with. Unfortunately, you can only carry 2 items at a time though, so get used to doing some backtracking through the levels to find more after you use them. And yes, if you're wondering, the backtracking can kinda get tedious at times, but thankfully none of the levels are really that big, so it's not that big of a problem. The levels do get trickier and trickier with its puzzles and item placement though the further you go, with some puzzles being particularly challenging to figure out while stuff's just constantly coming at you. And really, the main challenge and fun in this game is just navigating your way through these levels, putting together the items you need to progress, solving puzzles, and just finding your way to the boss. It was a winning formula in Zelda, and it works pretty well here too, just in a simpler format. Goof Troop is certainly different, and maybe not the breezy platformer that you might think of with a game starring everyone's favorite neurodivergent Disney character, but if you give it a shot, I think you'll actually come around to this one. The puzzle and exploration gameplay are good enough to keep you coming back for more once you get the hang of things. And the levels are designed well enough that you generally always know where to go if you find yourself stuck at a locked door or an obstacle that you can't get past. Oh, and yes, this one is also 2-player co-op, so you and a friend can tackle the challenges together if you want to. And yes, this game is much easier if you got another player with you. A lot of people have recommended Goof Troop to me over the years, and I can see why. No, it's not your standard Capcom Disney game, but it's a really neat game on its own. Even if you're not a fan of Goofy or shows exploits like I was, Goof Troop on the Super NES is shockingly still one of the better adventure games on the system. Aladdin for the Super NES is probably the Disney game that everyone thinks of when they think of a Disney game on the Super NES. Now, I've previously covered this game in my all-time most rented games video a while back, but I'd be absolutely blasted in the comments if I didn't include it in this video as well. Obviously, like most kids at the time, I was a big fan of the movie, and Aladdin was the Disney game that everyone was waiting for on the Super NES, especially since Capcom was, of course, developing the game. Unfortunately, I just don't think this game quite hit like people expected it to, especially since a certain other Aladdin game really kinda stole its thunder. But this is still a really solid game on the Super NES. Yes, if you can't tell, Aladdin is your standard platformer, but Capcom did mix the gameplay up just a little bit, with the main mechanic having you hand-springing off of enemies and obstacles, since Aladdin himself lacks any sort of direct attack besides being able to throw apples to stun enemies. It takes a minute to get used to the springing action, but once you do, you'll be chaining together jumps all over the place, leading to some really satisfying stages once you master it. And since a lot of these stages are set up specifically for that, then you better get used to flipping around like a crazed monkey, kinda like this guy. Really, about the only downside to Aladdin is just, I don't know, it's not one of Capcom's better looking games. It plays great, but the presentation department's just kind of flat, especially for Capcom. We've already seen just how good Magical Quest looked, and that game came out a full year before Aladdin did. I mean, honestly, this isn't a bad looking game, but for being such a huge release for Capcom on the Super NES, you'd think they could have maybe done a little bit better than a tiny Aladdin that barely looks like him, and a bunch of stages that look either drab or worse, just kind of generic. Looks aside though, Aladdin is still a very fun game from just the gameplay department. Mastering the vaulting is a lot of fun, especially when you get it just right. And the game at least takes longer than an hour to beat, so I mean that's a definite improvement over Magical Quest. Now honestly, I don't think I need to tell you to check this one out, since I'm sure if you've played the Super NES, then you've probably played Aladdin. But if you've somehow missed out on it, well, I still think it's worth a look. It may not be on anyone's wish list, but Aladdin for the Super NES is still a decently fun magic carpet ride. The Great Circus Mystery starring Mickey Mouse is the sequel to the Magical Quest and actually solves a lot of that game's problems. Now, if you're wondering if Capcom has made sweeping changes to this sequel besides slapping on a lame circus theme, then you'd be wrong. This is still very much more of the Magical Quest, but it's a much better version of the Magical Quest. While the platforming and overall design of that game remains the same, you do get 3 all-new outfits to use in this one. The first being a weird vacuum outfit that can suck up enemies and turn them into coins, and in some areas be used against enemies, like these candles that you can snuff out and then use them as something to stand on. Next up is the climbing outfit, which is essentially the mountaineering outfit from the original, just without the cool Bionic Commando grapple hook. You can still swing around on grapple points, but this new costume also lets you climb and stick to walls, which is perfect for exploring. And finally, we have the horsey one, where Mickey bounces around on a toy horse. This is the only costume that actually gives you a projectile attack, but it's unfortunately the most annoying to control, thanks to its delayed jumps and tendency not to actually shoot where you want it to. Still, it's pretty good for most bosses if you could just wrangle this wild pony. Now, if you can remember about 10 minutes ago when I was talking about the Magical Quest, my biggest complaint was that it just never really seemed to let you play around with the outfits much. Sure, you could switch between them, but there really wasn't much of a reason since each stage really only had one costume in mind. The Circus Mystery solves that problem by giving you much more of a reason to switch outfits. Of course, the first few levels are letting you get used to new outfits and what they do, but after that, the stages really open up. There are multiple sections where you'll need to change up your costume to progress, or even just to explore if you want to find some of the secrets. Heck, even using standard Mickey is something that you need to use in most of the stages now, since all of the outfits have their own unique use cases. This is exactly what I was wanting in the first game, so at least Capcom was listening or knew that maybe players wanted to, have a reason to play around with these cool outfits. The Circus Mystery is arguably Capcom's best Disney game on the Super NES. Unfortunately, it just didn't really seem to set the world on fire when it came out back in 1994. And I know this is going to shock everyone, but I didn't even rent this one. Yes, for as Disney crazy as I was back then, I just never picked this one up, and I don't really know why. Maybe I just thought I was getting too old to play these Disney games by then or something. It didn't help that the box made this one look extra kiddie, and the whole circus theme is just, oh man, it is not my thing. Thankfully though, I did eventually try this out at some point, and I'm really glad I did. This is a great sequel to one of my favorite games on the Super NES, and definitely a better game overall. This one even has 2-player co-op with Minnie Mouse instead of that taking turns nonsense from the original game. So yes, this is a big improvement. In the end, really the only mystery about the Great Circus Mystery is why it took me so long to play this one. And if you missed out on it too, then I suggest getting your butt to the circus tent, because this is one circus on the Super NES that you don't want to miss. The Ninjawarriors for the Super NES is one of those games that I just can't believe more people didn't play. Now, admittedly, there were a lot of games vying for kids' attention when Ninjawarriors came out back in 1994. But I mean, come on, just look at this game. It's like a bunch of Terminator endoskeletons dressed up in ninja outfits and started doing all these crazy karate moves. And if you like beat 'em ups, then you're in for a good time with Ninja Warriors. Basically pick from 3 robot ninjas that all have their own strengths and weaknesses. Big Boy here can punch like a bear, but his speed and slow punches means that you're going to need to constantly close gaps with his jet-powered backpack. The girl ninja is actually like the most well-rounded of all of them, with a nice mix of speed and power, along with her throw that allows you just to grab a guy and then plow across the screen with him, knocking down everyone in the process. And finally, there's this chicken robot ninja guy, who's obviously the most fast and agile one of all of them, with blade arms that he uses to slice up anyone around him. All 3 ninjas also get a screen-clearing super attack that slowly charges up as you fight. Just don't get knocked down or the bar resets itself. Once you picked your favorite Ninja Terminator, it's up to you to slice your way through dozens of enemies in some really solid arcade action. As you might have noticed already, the Ninja Warriors does away with the standard beat-em-up formula of being able to walk into and out of the screen, and is instead a strictly walk left and right affair. While you might think that would restrict the gameplay, well, you'd be wrong. It actually just distills it down to the point where there's almost no downtime or awkward hit detection as you try to line your character up with the enemy that you want to punch. Instead, there's a constant stream of enemies coming at you from each side of the screen, leaving it up to you on how you need to deal with each individual one. Some enemies even have front-facing armor that you need to get around to damage, all while you're trying to do these cool ninja flips and kicks to deal with the other guys that are trying to ruin your day. It kind of just makes you feel like a ninja, so I mean, I guess it's got that going for it. There's very few beat-em-ups that feel as fast and fluid as Ninja Warriors. It's just so much fun to beat guys up in this game, and it doesn't hurt that it looks just as good as it plays. The huge characters and really well-drawn backgrounds, plus all the over-the-top ninja animations, this is just as good as you can get on the Super NES. And that's why I just don't get how so many people passed on this one back in the day. The only people that I knew that ever played this game were the same sickos like me that played just about every game you could get a hold of. No one else even knew that this game existed. Admittedly, the game didn't get much magazine coverage back then that I saw, which is basically how your game lived and died as far as anyone even knowing about it. But still, this was always in stock at my video store. It's like no one even wanted to try it except me. And I think that just sucks because Ninja Warriors is one of the best games on the Super NES. And it just so happens that it's one of the best games you can get on any system these days, since it was completely remade and renamed to the Ninja Saviors. And as far as what I've played, this is even better than the Super NES version, with completely remastered graphics, all new moves, and even some of the content that was originally cut from the US Super NES version. So yeah, if you're one of the many people that missed out on either the Super NES original or this completely awesome remake, then tie your favorite t-shirt around your face like the dollar store ninja that you are, and sit down with this awesome sci-fi ninja beat 'em up. Biker Mice from Mars is another game from 1994 that was criminally overlooked. Now, if you've never heard of Biker Mice from Mars, then you obviously didn't grow up in the early 90s. This was one of about 6,000 or so cartoons that got tossed at kids back then in an effort to get us to spend money on toys. And if you wanted to get our attention in an ocean of cartoons, then you really needed to stand out. And a show about alien mice in a post-apocalyptic world that ride on motorcycles to fight evil, well, I'm not gonna lie, that's pretty good. And sure enough, it actually did really well, lasting 3 seasons or something, which is nothing to sneeze at back then. That also helped it get a ton of merchandise made for it. Toys, t-shirts, the whole 9 yards. Including a video game from none other than Konami. Yes, the same Konami that gave us some of the best games on the Super NES. And while you might be expecting Konami to bless us with yet another godly beat 'em up in the same vein as Turtles in Time, what we get instead is a racing game. Yeah, for whatever reason, Konami went with an isometric racing game for this one. And I mean, I guess I can kind of see where they're coming from. The cartoon is centered around mice that ride motorcycles, so racing game? Yep, racing game. If you've ever played rock and roll racing, then get ready for some serious deja vu, since Konami just essentially took the blueprint that rock and roll racing built its game around and basically said, what if we put mice in that? And you know what? I'm kind of glad they did, because Biker Mice from Mars is a pretty dang good racer. All you need to do to get things started is to pick your favorite alien and or mouse person, and then it's off to the track to try and blast your way through each race, cash in your winnings to upgrade your bike, and then rinse and repeat to make it through each round. Each track features a bunch of different obstacles that you need to contend with just as much as the other racers that are trying to slam you off the side of the track. Again, if you played rock and roll racing, then you're gonna feel right at home here. I will say that the character variety in Biker Mice is far better than the generic vehicles that you got in rock and roll racing, with some of them being just straight up weird, like this crab walker car. Unfortunately, each vehicle only gets one type of weapon to use though, so make sure you experiment with each one to find something that works. Overall, this is a very simple racer, which I guess shouldn't surprise anyone since it's based around a cartoon made for 7-year-olds. But what is surprising is just how much fun it is. And for someone like me that always wanted a sequel to rock and roll racing, I'm kinda mad that I just never picked this one up. It doesn't have the kinetic, crazy racing feeling that rock and roll did, but it's still a lot of fun on its own, and it really gets challenging with each new round. I feel like this game kind of fell on its own sword by not only being based on a kid's cartoon, but also being a racing game, which was just not the most popular genre on consoles back then, unless you were Mario Kart. But kudos to Konami, I guess, for trying something different. Turns out these Biker Mice are worth riding around with.
Wicked!
Cool Spot for the Super NES is a great example of a game that a lot of people may have passed up on just due to what it is. Now I will say that Cool Spot did sell well, but I really don't think anyone can blame the people that passed on it. What kid is going to waste their hard-earned money on buying a literal advertisement in video game form? Yes, in case you've completely forgotten or haven't lived 700 years like I have, 7-Up had a cute little mascot called Cool Spot for their brand back in the 90s. And I guess it must have been pretty popular because this thing was everywhere back then. Popular enough to even get a video game featuring the little guy sitting on store shelves. Now you may be asking, Jeremy, that's me by the way, my name's Jeremy, why did you play this? And furthermore, why would you feature it in a video? Well, the only answer that I can give you is because I thought Cool Spot was cute. And I also think that this game is pretty good. Good enough to be in a video. Yes, it's essentially an advertisement for 7-Up, but it's still a good game on its own. You of course play as Cool Spot, doing all the things a Cool Spot does, like wander around on the beach and sneak around in your crawl space for whatever reason, along with some other household locations. Your goal in each level is to explode everything in your path using your magical 7-Up powers while trying to find your little Cool Spot buddies that are trapped in cages. To free each trapped buddy, you'll need to collect enough of the spots that are littered around each stage. Hit the magic number and then you can bust your friend out of the clink and then move on to the next level. This one's definitely more of an exploration type platform game here, with levels sprawling all over the place. So if you're expecting non-stop action from Cool Spot, well then you might want to look elsewhere. But I always had a lot of fun exploring each level and trying to find all the spots that are hidden around. And it doesn't hurt that Cool Spot himself kept my attention on sheer charm alone. His little animations as he walks and flips around obstacles is still really good these days. That all probably has something to do with David Perry working on this game. You know, the guy that would go on to make a little game called Earthworm Jim. And you can definitely see some of that Earthworm Jim charm here as well. But really, when it comes down to it, this could have been the best designed game ever, but it's still a game based around a soda mascot. And that by itself is gonna get some sideways looks from kids passing by. Sometimes though, taking a gamble on something that doesn't look very appealing on the surface pays off, and if you're like me, then you end up with fond memories of a game about 7-Up. Life is definitely weird sometimes. And this game is just as weird, but in a good kind of weird. Not only is it a time capsule of early 90s soda nostalgia, but it's a great little platformer on its own. So if you've got an unusual appetite for the original Uncola and cute mascot platformers, then maybe seek professional help. But do so after playing this awesome little advertisement for the crispiest of sodas. Skyblazer for the Super NES is a neat little game that hardly anyone's played. But that probably has a lot to do with people skipping it as soon as they saw that this game came from Sony ImageSoft, a publisher mainly known for a bunch of bad video game adaptations of Sony's movie properties at the time. With such blowout hits as Cliffhanger, a game where you run around as Sylvester Stallone on the side of a mountain in the most painfully boring beat-em-up that's ever been created on the Super NES. And also the absolute masterpiece that is The Last Action Hero. This one's so bad that even Sony tried to deny that they had anything to do with it. But Sony ImageSoft wasn't completely bereft of decent games, and Skyblazer is proof of that. What you essentially get here is an action platformer set in a pretty generic fantasy world, where you're doing the whole hero gets beat down by the evil villain guy at the beginning of the game, and now it's up to you to find and defeat him to set things right with the world. It's eye-rollingly standard video game stuff. But the rest of the game actually has some moxie to it. There's a lot of fun platforming here thanks to just how fast and smooth it feels to control your character. Though his standard attack has a really odd hitbox that seems to whiff enemies even when it looks like you're hitting them. But even with that, I was still having a lot of fun running around and punching monsters in the face with this guy. A lot of the stages also have some really neat visual gimmicks to them, like this rotating tower that moves as you jump around it, and even a stage where you fly your way through like a kind of awkward shooter. There's generally always some kind of new, unique challenge in just about every level that you play, but that's not really always a good thing though, since some stages are just kinda awful, like this water stage that introduces one of the worst mazes that I've seen in a while, where you have to hit these switches to change the water flow to make it through. Unfortunately, you don't really know what each switch does, so you're just kind of swimming around in circles for ages trying to figure out the right combination. Still, there's definitely more good than bad here. It's just that the bad can kind of stand out. You also get new abilities as you play through the levels, like being able to dash across the screen or even heal yourself when you're low on health. Though once you get that heal spell, I can guarantee you that's what you're going to be using for like 90% of the rest of the game. The other powers are nice, but these monsters hit hard, and health pickups don't come too often. The bosses in the game are also impressive, since they all use some kind of neat Mode 7 effect in ways that are up there with some of the better on the system. Especially this rotating wall boss, where you have to jump through the gaps as he spins around. It's actually done really well. Oh, and if you're like me and felt that Skyblazer feels incredibly familiar, well, it's taken the skeleton of the game Hook. You remember Hook? The game based on the Robin Williams movie of the same name? And I'll give you one guess who published that one too. Anyway, the same developers that made Hook essentially repurposed the game into Skyblazer. It's not a one-to-one comparison, but the two are very similar in a lot of ways. And hey, I guess that makes two games published by Sony ImageSoft that I actually like. Imagine that. Again, Skyblazer isn't gonna blow you away with gameplay or graphics, but this is just a really solid game, and I didn't feel like I wasted my money on it when I rented it back in the day. Is it the best game you've ever played? No, it is not. But say it with me, it's a Sony ImageSoft game that's actually fun and creative. That alone is a rare feat. So if you get the chance, check Skyblazer out. It's kind of expensive these days, but if you got one of those magical emulator thingies, then do yourself a favor and load this one up. I really like it when a game punches above its weight, and Skyblazer definitely does that. And it just kind of sucks that so few people ever blazed these skies when it originally came out. Alien 3 for the Super NES is one of those games that I classify, for me at least, as a nice surprise. Now, Alien, in theory, shouldn't be hard to make into a good video game, considering the subject matter. But I've said that about a lot of movies that were turned into some of the worst games that I've ever played, so you just never can really tell. And I definitely wasn't too sure about a game based on a movie that, at the time, was considered the worst Alien movie ever made. But right off the bat, the game does make a really good first impression. And I'm just going to go ahead and say that no matter what you think about this game, I don't think that you can argue that it doesn't completely nail the vibe of the movie. You know I like my Vigigame art, and Alien 3 here it's pretty good. It's dark, it's moody, and really has that grungy, cold prison look of Alien 3 going on. All of the aliens look really good too, along with like the smaller details, like how the facehuggers skitter across the ground, and the alien eggs drip slime after you've melted them. There's even times when the lighting of an area changes when you fire your flamethrower off into the darkness. It's a really neat attention to detail. Ripley's also really well animated, almost too well, giving off this sluggish rotoscoped animation look to her at times. But I think this was just a rare example of really fluid character animation on the Super NES. So yeah, even if the rest of the game sucked, it at least looked really good while it was sucking. Thankfully, that ain't the case though, because the game's not half bad either, and it's actually kind of unique in its overall structure. You essentially wander around these vents that have doors scattered around so that you can access all of the areas in that level. Think of these vents as kind of like a level hub, and at first it kind of seems like you can just go wherever you want, since you can sort of just wander around anywhere if you want to. At least until you find a computer terminal that has missions assigned to it. Each mission will have you finding your way through multiples of areas of the prison to complete objectives, usually doing stuff like exterminating aliens or just saving prisoners that have been trapped somewhere. The objectives are mostly secondary though, as most of what you'll be doing is just making your way to them. You do get a basic map to show you the way, but these areas can be as much of a challenge to make your way through as it is to just accomplish the goal. And I think that's where it comes down to if you're gonna like this game or not. The mission-based gameplay is really fun and unique for a game like this, but it can get really repetitive. You'll be scouring through the same areas over and over, and the only real challenge seems to come from how annoying it can be to get through some of these sections, since a lot of these levels are nested inside of each other. And the crazy thing is that you can only access your map at the computer terminals, so you better get really good at memorizing where you need to go. The action in the game is at least solid enough to keep your attention as you mow through hordes of aliens with a really satisfying arsenal of weapons, including what may be the best flamethrower in any video game at the time. Melting bugs with this thing, man, it never gets old. It also helps that the sound of the aliens screaming and screeching as you burn them alive is just pitch perfect. Actually, all the sound in this game is really good. Honestly, I really wasn't expecting much from Alien 3 when I rented this one back in the day. I was mainly just kind of hoping for a game I could get a few hours of fun in from exterminating aliens. But I was really surprised that I got sucked into a game that's trying to do a lot more. The super moody vibe of the game completely recreates the movie's helpless, lonely feeling of being in a massive prison complex surrounded by danger. And I think that alone is worth some praise considering how bad most of these movies turned into games failed at representing the basics of what the movie was even about. So if you've never played this one simply due to you rightfully thinking that this is just another bad licensed video game, then maybe check it out. It's at least doing some different stuff that a lot of games didn't, and it just happens to look and sound fantastic as well. And for what it's worth, I still think this is one of the best movie-to-game adaptations that you can get on 16-bit consoles.
Game over, man!
Batman Returns for the Super NES is actually a much better game adaptation of the movie than a lot of people give it credit for. Like every kid in the early 90s, I was all about those Michael Keaton Batman movies. But the overall darker tone of Batman Returns kinda had me wondering what kind of games that we were actually gonna get from it. Thankfully, Konami was there to grab up the licensing for this movie and give us a game worthy of the Caped Crusader. Plus, they really went above and beyond at making this game stick surprisingly close to the film. The game itself is obviously a beat-em-up, but it's a really good beat-em-up, one of the best on the system actually. The action is your standard walk around and beat guys up gameplay, but there's this really satisfying crunchiness to it all. It's hard to describe it, but I highly suggest playing this one with some headphones on to hear what I'm talking about. Like you can just feel the bones crunching when Batman lays waste to yet another clown goon that decided to get within arm's reach. This definitely isn't a version of Batman that cares too much about people's overall health after he's done with them, since he'll just take a couple of dudes and smash their skulls together or slam people through glass at a moment's notice. You've even got your batarangs that you can toss at enemies to stun them until you get close enough to do even more horrible things to them. And of course you also get your bat grapple hook so you can swing around the stage, which is great when you need to get close to a boss. There's honestly enough variety in the ways that you can beat down these clowns that it kinda makes up for their overall repetitiveness as they come at you non-stop. With all manner of dirty hobo clowns and circus people wandering around, it's like being at an ICP concert, just with less people trying to break bottles over your head. My only complaint is that I just kinda wish there were a few more different types of dirty clowns to beat up. So overall, I mean, the game looks great, it plays great, and it sounds super beefy. But what really surprised me was just how hard it leans into adapting the plot of the movie into a game. Like, check out the opening cinematic here that I sped way up, that spends a solid 5 minutes completely recapping the entire opening of the movie and then introducing both villains. This is pretty crazy for a 16-bit game. And for being a beat-em-up, it does a great job of stretching full scenes of the movie into playable stages. Of course, some liberties had to be taken here and there to make this into a fun video game, but overall I was impressed with just how close it sticks to the movie. There's even some fun details that you probably never even noticed, like how you can use your grapple hook to pull out a chunk of wall behind the first boss, just like the movie.
You missed.
Unfortunately though, it doesn't kill him in one hit, so that's definitely a missed opportunity there. Batman Returns is just one of those games I can sit down with and have fun with just about every time. This is a really solid beat-em-up, and honestly one of the better Batman games that's ever been released. It does such a good job of adapting the movie into the game, hitting just about every single story beat while giving you plenty of fun environments to beat clowns up in. At the same time, it makes you feel like you're just as powerful as Batman is, which, believe it or not, was pretty rare for games starring the Dark Knight. If only this one was 2-player co-op, then we might have had an all-time classic here. As it stands though, Batman Returns is an excellent way to play a game based on the movie. Putting the movie and this game together just seemed natural, like they're the same, just
Split. Right down the center.
So check this one out if you haven't, especially if you just really hate clowns for whatever reason. Hook for the Super NES is a fun take on the early 90s Steven Spielberg movie of the same name. Now, Hook the movie seems to be fairly divisive these days, but I definitely remember it being a pretty big deal back when I was a kid. But still, I really don't know what I was expecting when I finally saw the game based on the movie sitting on my video store shelf, especially since my old friend Sony ImageSoft was publishing this one. But the back of the box looked like anything but a Sony ImageSoft game. I mean, it was colorful, the art looked good, hell, it looked like a video game for the most part. And that's more than I can say for a lot of the slop that they published. And yeah, sure enough, this actually ended up being a fun little game loosely based on the movie. And when I say loosely, I mean very loosely, since the game only really tries to recreate the opening of the movie with Peter's kids being kidnapped by Captain Hook, and then him training with the Lost Boys to ultimately defeat Rufio to finally become the one true Pan. God, I forgot about the whole Pan thing. That's still so weird to me. If you don't know, then just watch the movie.
I'm the Pan now!
But anyway, once Peter has finally become the Pan after his training, then the game basically tosses any semblance of this game being based on the movie out the window, and instead just kind of turns into an action platform game. But at least it's a fun action platformer. There's honestly not much to it since all you're doing is just jumping and slashing your way through a variety of stages, but it's at least fun enough to keep your attention. You may at first be put off by just how slow Peter moves around, since he's also apparently forgotten how to move at a speed faster than slow jaunt. You do get a run, but it takes so long to build up that half the time you don't have enough room to get up to pace. You at least get one hell of a jump that can travel more than half the screen though, allowing you to cover way more distance than you'd think. I also love how the jumping animation really sells it too, as you just blast into the air with your fists out to the side, and then you just slowly come down in this classic superhero pose. It just looks really good. I guess the one big gimmick in the game to let you know that this is in fact a Peter Pan game is the ability to fly. But you can only fly when you stand below Tinkerbell to suck up some of her fairy magic. After that, you can only fly so much, as indicated by the flight bar at the top of the screen. And it tends to go away pretty quick, so you kinda have to get used to rationing it. But the sections where you can fly are a lot of fun. This is one thing in the game that I wish was used a little bit more often, since it only comes up for sections when the game wants you to fly. But it would have been fun to have it on a more consistent basis, especially with how the levels can be kind of wide open at times. Hook was one of those games that ended up being a fun rental, but something that I just didn't feel like I needed to ever rent again. It's fun while it lasts, but nothing really grabbed me to the point of wanting to play it multiple times. But I don't think that's really a bad thing, really. It does a good job of representing the movie in video game form, while at the same time being an entertaining platformer. Again, a rare feat for most games based around a movie license back then. But if you're a fan of the movie and never played this one, then I think it's worth a look. It may not be something that's going to keep you coming back to Neverland, but it's definitely the, pan of Peter Pan video games. Addams Family Values for the Super NES is one of those movie-to-game adaptations that doesn't really seem like it has anything to do with the movie. Now, this is the game that was actually recommended to me by someone in the comments a few videos back, saying that this game wasn't bad at all. So I figured I'd toss it into this video if it was actually decent. And really, looking at pictures of the game and the back of the box, I wasn't really seeing what this one had to do with Addams Family Values, the movie, besides having Addams Family characters in it. Well, the answer to that is, it doesn't. Now, I've seen Addams Family Values quite a few times, and I don't think Ocean Software, the publisher of this game, had any intention on making it follow the movie at all. Theoretically, the game follows the premise that the nanny from the movie has kidnapped baby Pubert, and now it's up to Uncle Fester to save him. And I say theoretically because there is nothing in the game that really indicates this besides the back of the box. Now, I haven't played all the way through this one, so if it somehow does tie more into the movie at some point, then please let me know in the comments. Otherwise, this is just Addams Family Values in name only. And usually I don't care too much about this stuff. Like, I just got done mentioning how Hook barely uses the movie's plot at all, but at least it was there a little bit. Addams Family Values is just, it's not even in the same world. Thankfully though, there is a good game here. As you can see, this is more of a top-down adventure game in the same vein as your typical Zelda game, as you wander around as Uncle Fester accomplishing tasks for other family members. Basically by finding items and or keys scattered around the open world, opening up new sections to explore, and then making your way through a dungeon with some sort of oversized boss at the end. The world itself is actually surprisingly large, with a lot of areas to explore and items to find. It can definitely be one of those where the heck do I go kind of games at times though. But if you got a good guide or you just like wandering around until you find out where you need to go, then this is a pretty fun place to explore. Fester's only means of getting through all this is by shooting lightning out in front of him, though it kind of just comes out off-center, making it awkward to line up smaller enemies with. And trust me, there's a lot of smaller enemies scooting around this game. Your lightning also gets weaker in both length and power the more life you lose, and besides totally being that's what she said, you basically get to the point where you have to be right up on enemies if you're down to one skull. And at that point you may as well just take the hit and die because these enemies are relentless in a very annoying way. Thankfully you do get more skulls the further you get, but this is definitely one of the more annoying things early in the game. The dungeons also do a really good job of mixing things up, with some being more puzzle-based as far as making your way through, while others are a more straightforward affair. Like how the first dungeon is all about teleporters and switches, while the second dungeon has you escorting a plant around in a more action-based level. Unfortunately, the bosses that are making the homes in these dungeons, at least from what I've played, are pretty basic. But still, I guess you can't ask for too much from an Addams Family game. It definitely helps that Addams Family Values is really fun to look at as well, thanks to some awesome gloomy and grimy art. Each area has its own distinct look with some nice touches like sudden storms and hazy clouds hanging over a dank swamp. There's definitely no pastels to be found anywhere in this game. Uncle Fester himself is even pretty cute in a bug-eyed psychopath kind of way. I also really love all the Addams Family specific text in the game, and this is one thing that actually really does feel like the movie. The developers did an excellent job of each character giving off that trademark Addams Family movie vibe here. I just wish there was more of it. But overall, this is a surprisingly fun Zelda clone set in the Addams Family universe. I guess just don't come into this one expecting it to have anything to do with the movie, because it's definitely doing its own thing. Thankfully, that thing is pretty good, making this one Addams Family game that's surprisingly actually worth your time. Cybernator for the Super NES was like nothing I had played up to that point. I was pretty new to the whole mech thing in the early 90s, and the idea of piloting a giant mech suit around and blowing stuff up was instantly appealing to me. But what I thought was just going to be a basic action game like Contra or something like that quickly turned into a game that had a lot more to it. But before we get to all that story stuff, you need to know how to play it, and the best way that I can describe the action in Cybernator is just heavy. Everything feels like it has tons of weight behind it, and rightfully so since you're piloting a massive mech suit that weighs hundreds of tons. Of course it should feel heavy. Even just falling from short distances, you can see your mech's armor plates sagging under the weight of the landing. And when you jump, it just kind of looks like someone's launched a semi-truck into the air and they're just hoping for the best when it lands. I love these little animation touches that conveys just how heavy your mech is. And while the action is definitely slower due to being in a mech suit, that's not really a bad thing. It just means you gotta play it a little bit different than your typical action game. Your mech suit is surprisingly versatile though. You start off with a basic Vulcan cannon, but as you play you'll pick up new weapons like missiles that are great for bosses, and a laser beam that can cut through multiple enemies at once. You can make each weapon stronger by collecting power-ups as you go, with each weapon getting a more powerful version of itself once it's fully leveled up. But there is a catch, since you can only upgrade the weapon that you have equipped, so choose wisely. Each level has you undertaking an assigned mission, though most just boils down to you making it to the end of a particular stage and then defeating a boss. Some, however, actually have multiple ways to beat a stage, like the end of this one where you can either defeat a boss that's trying to kill you or destroy the massive boosters on the space station hurtling it to Earth. And depending on what you do in stages like this will determine what ending to the story you get, and that's definitely something you didn't see too much back then. Speaking of the story, this is something you're going to either love or hate about Cybernator. Because make no mistake about it, this game wants to tell you a story. A dense, detailed, dramatic mech war story complete with political intrigue, plot twists, and lots of characters. And it's going to tell you that story whether you like it or not. Dialogue boxes will pop up mid-action and go on for minutes sometimes, so if you just want to blow stuff up, this is going to get old really fast for you. The crazy thing is that the Japanese release of this game had even more plot since Konami toned it down for us Western audiences. That being said though, if you do like a good anime mech drama, then really this isn't too bad of a story at all, if you can just keep track of it. Cybernator stuck with me because it just felt so different from anything else on the Super NES. The heavy, grounded mech combat with story-driven gameplay, it was like an interactive anime for me, and I was really into anime at the time. And if you're thinking, wait, doesn't this game kind of sound familiar if it's part of something else? Well, yeah, it is, you're right. In Japan, it's known as Assault Suits, part of a franchise that continued all the way to the Saturn and PlayStation, with re-releases happening all the way up till, well, now. And I think that's how you should check it out these days thanks to Assault Suits Vulcan Declassified on the Nintendo Switch. This is actually the original version of Cybernator, just with an all-new English translation plus all the cut content that was missing from the Super NES version. So if you're curious, then check that one out on the eShop. But really, no matter which way you end up playing this one, I think you're gonna have a good time, especially if you like story-based mech games. So strap your butt in your favorite giant mech and experience for yourself the one-of-a-kind sci-fi action and drama that Cybernator is famous for. King of Dragons for the Super NES was one of those go-to beat-em-ups that offered a lot more than what you'd think. Now, don't think that you can make it through one of my videos without getting at least one beat-em-up mentioned, but hear me out, because I think King of Dragons is one of the most unique on the system. The combination of solid gameplay and a bunch of RPG stuff that was never seen in games like this back then makes King of Dragons a sleeper contender for best beat-em-up on the Super NES. As soon as that title screen hits, you know that this is going for the most generic RPG fantasy vibe that you can possibly achieve on the Super NES. And the selection of characters confirms that, with a bunch of very familiar RPG archetypes for you to choose from. And unlike a lot of games like this, the characters you choose are very different from one another. I mean, you got your typical damage classes like the warrior and cleric that excel in hacking and slashing your way through things, but you've also got classes like the archer and mage that specialize in long-range attacks. And they're not just damage classes disguised with a robe and a bow, since they actually play differently than the guys that like to cave heads in with heavy weapons. But what's even more interesting is that each character can level up both their power and gear just like a RPG. Leveling up really only seems to raise your health bar a bit, but that does help with how much magic your character can use, since this is unfortunately one of those games where your special attack also uses health points. But leveling up mitigates that a bit, letting you use your magic more liberally, or just take a few more hits from some of the more annoying bosses. The gear level ups are a bit more interesting, since they'll usually drop out of chests laying around or at the end of the level. This new gear will actually change your appearance a bit and also do more damage to the enemies than your previous gear did, which gives the player a nice visual cue that they're actually getting stronger, and it does work pretty well. Of course, you're pretty much guaranteed to max your character out by the end of the game, so it's not a deeply strategic RPG experience, but the fun comes from experimenting with different classes and seeing how they evolve. And of course, it's even better if you got a buddy around, since teaming up and trying out different class combinations is one of the best things about the game. But for as basic as its leveling systems are, I think King of Dragons really excels at feeling like you're getting stronger and stronger. The constant new gear and leveling your character up gives you way more of a sense of progression thanks to being able to see and feel your character getting stronger. That's why a lot of brawlers get boring within a level or two, and unless you're a crazy person like I am and enjoy the monotony of that stuff, then King of Dragons may be for you. Capcom would eventually refine these ideas in their Dungeons & Dragons arcade games, which are widely considered some of the best beat-em-ups ever made. Tower of Doom and Shadows over Mysteria took everything King of Dragons did and pushed it further, turning them almost into full-fledged RPGs rather than just mindless brawlers. But if you want a taste of where those games got their start, then King of Dragons on the Super NES is still a lot of fun. It's a quick and fun playthrough, especially if you got a friend around. And besides maybe Turtles in Time, I think King of Dragons is the beat-em-up that has aged the best on this system. And I think this is one quest that you definitely shouldn't pass up on. Rock and Roll Racing for the Super NES is a game that I never expected to like. Now, I think I've mentioned this before that I was just not the biggest racing game fan back around when the Super NES was out. So when I saw Rock and Roll Racing sitting there with a hot pink cover yelling about music by bands that were all at least 20 years old at the time, I wasn't really jumping to play it. But for whatever reason, possibly because my dad was yelling at me to hurry up and find a game to rent, I took a chance on it, and I was not prepared for just how much fun I ended up having with this game. As soon as you turn this one on, you realize it's not going to be your standard racing game, as the most Super NES sounding rendition of Bad to the Bone that you've ever heard starts blaring at you. Now, licensed music in video games was pretty rare back then, but Rock and Roll Racing lived up to its name with tracks by Steppenwolf, Judas Priest, and others, none of which that I had any idea who they were, but my dad did assure me that they were a big deal at one point. Once you're done jamming out to the menu music, you're then pushed straight into selecting your driver from some of the homeliest looking aliens that I've ever seen, and then selecting your vehicle to race in. Each one has their own stats, weapons, and upgrades to go along with it, with the most important thing being that you can paint it whatever color you want. After you've made the prettiest alien hobo car imaginable, it's time to get out onto the track. And that's where Rock and Roll Racing's gameplay is arcade racing at its finest. All you need to do is jam on the gas, slide around corners, blow people up with weapons, and pray that no one does it better than you by the time the checkered flag waves. It sounds simple, but what sets this one apart is the physics. Every vehicle handles differently. And just as you start getting the hang of not slamming into every corner of the track with your current vehicle, the game throws a new one at you. Of course, upgrading your car does help some with faster engines, better armor, improved tires, and all that stuff, but even maxed out, you're still at the mercy of the track and the ridiculous AI. Thankfully, you can dish out just as much punishment as you take with forward-firing projectiles, rear-mounted weapons, and turbo boosts that usually just send you flying into walls or off the track entirely. At first, you can only use all this stuff once per lap, but upgrading is essential since winning most races won't be how well you stick to that sweet racing line. Instead, it's all about making sure everyone in front of you explodes faster than you do. And the sooner they do, the better your chances are at not coming in last. You also get various pickups on the track itself, like health and money, along with totally bogus stuff like mines and slime puddles that slow you down. But if you can keep your wits about you and manage your weapons well enough while having a little bit of luck on your side, then you shouldn't have too many problems getting first in most of the races. Most Super NES racing games back then leaned toward realism for whatever reason. Like, I'm pretty sure 80% of the racing games back then were some sort of Formula One game. At least that's what it seemed like to me.
It's just like the real thing.
I wanted arcade racing, stuff like Mario Kart and Top Gear, but for whatever reason, those games were kinda in short supply. So something like rock and roll racing was exactly what I needed. The super fast and chaotic gameplay was right up my alley. And the two-player co-op sealed the deal. I remember renting this one multiple times just because it was one of the rare games that my dad seemed to actually really like playing with me. Now, if I had to pick my favorite Super NES racing game, it's probably rock and roll racing. Mario Kart and Top Gear are classics, but for the sheer fun and nostalgia, rock and roll racing wins. And thanks to Blizzard's arcade collection on the PC, it's still easy to play today. If you've never tried it, then I think it's absolutely worth the money. But regardless of where you play it, this is one racing game that, thankfully, never stopped rocking.
Nick scores a first-place knockout. Viper finishes second. Rip is a weak third. Shred is in another time zone.
Super Adventure Island for the Super NES is about as simple as video games get, but that's something that I can actually appreciate at times. Super Adventure Island hit stores fairly soon after the Super NES was first released, and I can remember this one being one of the few games that was sitting on my video store shelves for it, and I was rabid for anything Super NES at the time, so you better believe I picked this one up even though I had never even played an Adventure Island game before. And what I ended up with was a no-frills arcade platformer wrapped in some incredible graphics and sound. Now, I don't think I need to spend too much time explaining the gameplay because Super Adventure Island keeps it about as basic as you can get, maybe too basic depending on who you ask. But all you really need to know how to do is run and jump your way through each stage, avoiding enemies along the way since this is one of those games where you can only take one hit and then you gotta start over. There is a sort of time limit in place with a bar at the top of the screen that slowly ticks down the more you move, with the only way to refill it by grabbing the various fruit that's littered around each stage. But really, there's so much fruit in these stages that it rarely comes into play up until the end of the game. And really, that's pretty much it. You do get a couple of weapons to chuck at enemies every now and again, and you also get to find a skateboard to ride, because nothing says early 90s radical like a caveman on a skateboard. But you know what? Even with how simple it is, I still had fun with it. Normally, I'm not big on games that demand you to memorize every little thing just to avoid cheap one-hit deaths. And yeah, you will run out of continues, but getting back to where you were is quick enough that it really never feels too frustrating. Of course, the real standout here isn't the gameplay, it's the presentation. Now, coming from the NES, Super Adventure Island looked really good, with bright, colorful stages and big, detailed sprites. The graphics admittedly did start to lose a lot of their luster as even better looking games kept coming out for the system, but at the time this was a great looking game. But the soundtrack is what really stuck with me. Even now, this holds up really well. This was one of those games that made me realize just how good video game music could be, thanks in no small part to the legendary Yuzo Koshiro being the composer. This is the same guy behind Streets of Rage 2's incredible soundtrack. And a lot of that game's musical DNA is here as well, just with a more laid-back hip-hop vibe. Here, you guys listen to it for a minute and tell me what you think. But for all of its strengths, Super Adventure Island got a bit of a cold reception when it was launched. People weren't thrilled that it felt like a step back from Adventure Island 3 on the NES, which had an explorable map, rideable dinosaurs, and even items to use. That game was basically Super Mario 3 in Adventure Island form. So to go from that to a game that stripped things back to basics, well, you can see why some folks weren't very happy. But for a kid like me renting the game for a weekend and just looking for some quick fun and action, Super Adventure Island absolutely delivered. As mentioned earlier, I missed out on the NES Adventure Island games at the time, so this was my first experience with the series. And honestly, it made me go back and check out the earlier games on the NES. And I'd bet that I wasn't the only one that did that. But if you were one of those people that missed out on the first Adventure Island game on the Super NES, then try it out. It's simple arcade fun, plus the music is so good that it deserves a recommendation on that alone. The Adventures of Batman and Robin on the Super NES is exactly what fans wanted out of a game based on the show. There was a time in the early 90s when I was obsessed with the Batman the Animated Series. It was dark, stylish, and so far ahead of its time that I can't believe it even got made. It's still one of my all-time favorite shows, and something that totally holds up even to this day. So when Konami finally got the chance to turn the animated series into a game, I was stalking my video store for a copy. And when it finally hit, what I ended up with was a game that emulates the show so well that it just kind of feels like you're playing an episode of it at times. Probably the first thing that you're going to notice about the game is just how well Konami completely nailed the look of the animated series. Now, for those of you that didn't know, the animated series actually painted all of their backgrounds on black paper, which is why just about every scene in the show looks like it's draped in shadow. And Konami has replicated that look perfectly here, with every level giving off that signature animated series look. Like the creepy amusement park that has Gotham screaming by in the background, or chasing Catwoman across rooftops while floodlights illuminate the buildings. It's absolutely what you want if you're a fan of the show. And besides the backgrounds, you can already see that the characters look like they jumped right out of the cartoon, with Batman in particular being one of the best animated sprites in any game on that system. His fluid movements looks like something that we wouldn't get until more powerful systems showed up, and it was jaw-dropping the first time I loaded this game up. And even the rest of the characters in the game are really well animated, especially Catwoman. She just looks incredible in particular. But besides how it looks, Batman and Robin does exactly what it needs to with the gameplay as well. The easy answer to turning Batman into a video game is the stuff that we've already had, like the excellent but hard-as-nails Batman games on the NES, or even the more recent Batman Returns that Konami also developed, but went with a more standard beat-em-up formula for that one. Those are two great examples of how to make a great Batman game. But you know what? Neither of them really captured the essence of Batman, like how he's more of a detective than a face-shattering action hero. Well, Batman the Animated Series gets that right. Yes, of course, Batman does mainly run around and punch guys in the face in this game, but there's large chunks when you're not. Instead, there's stages where you're searching through museums in the dark for hostages, or working your way through a virtual maze trying to figure out riddles. It really feels like more of what Batman would do in an episode of the show. And it also helps that each stage is presented as a full episode with title screen and all. Of course, you can't be Batman without his gear, and this game gives you plenty of toys to play with, like batarangs that you need to use to stun enemies, your grapple hook to swing across gaps with, and other more specific equipment, some of which you need to learn where it's best to use them. Like how the flashlight is great for finding traps and bombs on the floor in the dark, and your X-ray glasses can be used to find hidden passages in Riddler's stage. Unfortunately, it's not all perfect though. For one, I've just never been the biggest fan of how Batman himself feels in this game. Yes, he's really well animated, but he kind of feels slippery at times. And enemy hitboxes can seem kinda wonky, especially if you get too close to them. Also, some of the boss fights seem to go on for way too long, since a lot of them rely on you dodging attacks for an eternity before you can get a few hits in yourself. Oh, and don't think I wouldn't mention that Batmobile stage because, whoa, it doesn't feel good and turning the corners feels awkward thanks to it seemingly using like mode 7 to rotate the entire screen when you do. And you have to get it just about perfect to beat the time limit because, of course, there's a time limit. Besides those minor nitpicks though, this is still an incredible game all around. The Adventures of Batman and Robin achieved something very few video games back then accomplished. It took the show that the game was based on and perfectly emulated what makes that show so good in video game form. Batman isn't a one-man army in this game. He has to use his wits and head just as much as he does his fists to make it through the stages, just like he does in the cartoon. Personally, I don't think I could imagine a better playable version of the animated series than what's here. And I don't think anyone else could either, since there's never been a better version of the show in video game form than this. So I don't think I need to tell you to check this one out if you haven't played it and you're a fan of the show. This is not only one of the best games on the Super Nintendo, it's also one of the best Batman games that's ever been made. X-Men Mutant Apocalypse is the X-Men game us kids on the Super Nintendo waited very patiently for. Now, if you weren't a kid back around in the early 90s, you may not be aware of just how popular X-Men was back then. It was everywhere, and comic book stuff back then wasn't quite as in vogue as it is today. But X-Men really broke through to the mainstream thanks to the popularity of Jim Lee's X-Men comic that introduced everyone to what we consider these days to be the modern-day X-Men characters and their designs. Along with the excellent Saturday morning cartoon on Fox Kids that meticulously followed the comic book series at times. And there's not too many kids that didn't play X-Men on the Sega Genesis when it came out. This was a massive release for that console at the time. Every kid wanted to play this game. And for those of us that only had a Super NES, all we could do was look on with jealous envy, since all we really had at the time was the slop that LJN was putting out. But that all changed nearly 2 years later when Capcom would finally give us Super NES owners a proper X-Men game with X-Men Mutant Apocalypse. And while it may have come a little late to the party, it certainly gave us X-Men fans on the console exactly what we wanted. And what we wanted was a game where we could pick our favorite mutants and beat a bunch of bad guys up using their mutant powers. And for the most part, I think that's what we got. X-Men Mutant Apocalypse isn't going for some dramatic retelling of a certain comic book arc or anything like that. It's basically just using what story there is as window dressing to get the mutants to a variety of locations to do their thing. Which was fine with me, especially when I saw that you could select between 5 of the most popular X-Men characters to do so with. Unfortunately, unlike the Genesis version, you can't choose what character you want at any given time. Instead, each character has their own stage associated with them. While it would have been cool to take on any stage with any character, it was more than enough that we could at least select from a solid lineup of everyone's favorites. Except for maybe Beast, but I'll take what I can get. Especially when they all look this good. And yeah, X-Men Mutant Apocalypse really looks the part. Capcom did an excellent job bringing all the X-Men heroes to life with big sprites that look exactly like their comic book designs. And that shouldn't be too big of a surprise since Capcom would release their first Marvel fighting game later that year with Children of the Atom, which had some of the most iconic designs for those characters that's ever been put into a video game. X-Men Mutant Apocalypse unfortunately doesn't feature those exact designs though, but you can definitely see a lot of similarities. Especially with how each character plays, since they all get their signature special attacks by using basic fighting game controller motions. And the best thing is that, unlike the Genesis game, you can use these powers whenever you want without them sucking your character's power away. So it ends up just being a lot of fun to spam moves over and over, even if it does kind of seem to break the game whenever you do. It didn't really matter to me though, because it was just too much fun slicing people up with Wolverine's claws, or melting everyone else with Cyclops' optic blast. Now, I don't think X-Men Mutant Apocalypse is an all-time classic for the system, but for us kids just wanting a fun X-Men game on the Super Nintendo, well, I think it delivered, at least for me anyway. It's not very long and it can be on the easy side, but it checked all the other boxes for what I wanted from an X-Men game. Can I play as my favorite characters? Check. Do they all look and play like they do in the comic book? Double check. And is it a fun game just to sit down for a little while and slap some bad guys around with the X-Men? Well, I think you already know the answer to that one. Now, if you're expecting much more than that, then I think you might be disappointed here. But if you keep your expectations in check and just want to have a good time beating up guys with your favorite X-Men heroes, then I think X-Men Mutant Apocalypse is probably the best X-Men experience on the Super Nintendo. Spider-Man Maximum Carnage for the Super NES may be one of the best games at the time at feeling like it stepped right out of a comic book. And I'll be honest here, I did not play this one as a kid. For one, it has that LJN logo sitting right there, and I've just never had a good experience with any of their games on the NES. And two, the back of the box shows that this is a single-player only game, which just seemed like a bad time all around. So yeah, I passed this one up several times, even if it did have that super sweet red cartridge. But when I did finally play it years later, I was actually kind of surprised. The game always seemed to have its fans, and I can kind of see why now. One area where I think Maximum Carnage really excels as a superhero game is really going the extra mile and trying to integrate the actual comic book storyline into the game. Not only do you get an exhaustive amount of comic book cutscenes retelling the Maximum Carnage storyline from the comics, but you also get a lot of in-game story events too. Things will just happen out of nowhere during a level to progress the plot. Like Spidey losing a fight when he gets beat in the actual comic book, and then having the hero suddenly jump in to rescue you. They even take into account where Spidey and Venom would be in the story at the time when you'd pick them. Like the first time you can choose your character, Peter's still in New York while Eddie's out in San Francisco. And if you choose Eddie, then you actually play a stage in San Francisco. Now, admittedly, the only way that you can tell it's supposed to be San Francisco is from a slight incline in the street, but it's still a really neat touch that they actually went that far. I also really like how the game looks. The screenshots that I saw back in the day didn't really translate to how good the game looks when you're playing it. The developers really tried to keep the comic book vibe going with the graphics here, with a lot of the game looking like it was hand-drawn, like how the city streets here look like they've been shaded with a pen. It was a style that was rarely seen in games back then, and it looks pretty good here. Also, the characters themselves really stand out on top of it with their vibrant and exaggerated look. Honestly, this is a game that has grown on me visually over the years, and overall I think it's a neat looking game most of the time. But while Spider-Man Maximum Carnage does a lot right in the presentation and story aspects of the game, the gameplay unfortunately makes a lot of bad beat-em-up decisions. And yes, if you couldn't tell, this is a beat-em-up, but controlling Spidey and Venom does feel good, and the action moves along at a decently fast pace. But there's a lot of little things that kind of makes it feel sloppy. First and foremost is the repetition. Beat-em-ups live and die by how fast they start to feel tedious, and Maximum Carnage gets old pretty quick. Not only is there like a total of 6 repeating hoodlums that you have to fight over and over throughout the entire game, but backgrounds are also reused. It feels less like you're making progress and more like you're just doing the same thing over and over with the same enemies in the same locations until something happens in the story to change it. Also, the action in general, while decent, has a lot of weirdness to it. Spidey and Venom both get a lot of fun abilities that they can use, like web shields, and being able to grab enemies from across the screen to pull them close enough so that you can continue your beatdown. And as long as there's only 1 or 2 guys on screen, then it works pretty well. But this game loves to put multiple, very aggressive enemies around you all the time, and they can and will get cheap hits in while you're in the middle of dishing out a combo to someone else. You almost have to play the game strategically at times to make up for this, like binding an enemy with your web and then jumping away to isolate another to thin the crowd. And while that would be fun in a better game, it feels more like you're trying to cheese the AI when you're doing it here. But overall, I think Spider-Man Maximum Carnage is a lot better than a lot of people give it credit for. It's not the best beat-em-up on the system by far, but it's got a lot of personality to it. Plus, its dedication to retelling an entire comic book story arc is actually really impressive. It's just a little rough around the edges and a bit too repetitive for a game like this. Also, not being two-player co-op really hurts a game like this, unless you're just a really good game, and Maximum Carnage is not that good of a game. But I do think it's a really good comic book game, one of the few that genuinely wears its appreciation for the comics on its sleeve, and that does go a long way for me. So if you've never played it, either due to hearing that it's not that great or just seeing that big LJN logo on the front of the box, then try it out. It's definitely one of the more unique attempts at bringing a comic book to life on the Super Nintendo. Marvel superheroes in War of the Gems for the Super NES should have been the Avengers of superhero games on 16-bit consoles. Being a fan of Capcom's X-Men Mutant Apocalypse game that we just talked about, and then seeing the follow-up on store shelves was like an awesome comic book crossover on its own for me. This time Capcom taking a stab at the whole Infinity War saga, with characters like Spiderman and Captain America as playable characters now, among others. This alone made it seem like there was no way that this could have been anything but the best comic book game on the system. But after an hour or so playing this one back home, well, you'll see. First impressions are good here. There's an attempt at retelling the Infinity Stone saga, with your mission being to go to the various locations to fight a boss who's holding on to one of those oh-so-shiny stones. But like X-Men, the story here isn't really the focus, though I will admit there's more of an attempt here to tell a story than what X-Men could barely muster. Unlike X-Men though, you can actually choose your stage from a map, and also pick whichever character you want to try and beat that level with. And that's exactly what I wanted with Mutant Apocalypse, since each character isn't locked to a particular stage now. Instead, you're free to experiment with whatever character you think would work best for that level. And there can even be multiple paths through a level depending on which character you pick, but more on that in a minute. The 5 characters that you can pick from play exactly how they should too, since a lot of the same moves each superhero has comes from Capcom's very own Marvel Superheroes fighting game. Heck, the portraits for each character is literally the sprites that are used in that game. Wolverine is the only one of the bunch returning from the first game, and he still has all of his moves that he had there. The new additions are exactly who you'd want them to be though. Captain America can toss his shield across the screen, Iron Man can shoot his lasers and fly around the stage, and a very awkward-looking Hulk charges through anything in his path. Oh, and of course Spidey's here too, and he can shoot webs at enemies. War of the Gems further expands on each superhero's powers though, by giving them some extra abilities that they can use to explore the stage with, like how Spidey can cling to walls to climb up to areas that other characters can't get to. Sometimes even revealing entire alternate sections to the level that lets you find usable items for when you're back at base. Like health tanks to refill health, and even revives that allow you to bring a hero back to life if you happen to fail on any given stage. There's also an entire set of bonuses for each Infinity Stone that you get from defeating certain bosses, like letting you choose from stuff like increased attack power, speed, and even psychic attacks. I mean, it's crazy how cool all of this stuff sounds, and yeah, it should be really cool, but the execution is where War of the Gems starts to fall apart. Now you would think that Capcom would be able to make the follow-up to X-Men Mutant Apocalypse even better than that game was, but for whatever reason, War of the Gems just feels off. And the crazy thing is that I started this review for War of the Gems before Mutant Apocalypse, and I was having such a bad time with this game that I started to question if Mutant Apocalypse felt this bad too. But no, I loaded up X-Men and it still felt good. I was immediately having fun with it. There was a better pace and feel to Mutant Apocalypse. And whatever pace this game does have is nearly completely ruined thanks to your character being knocked down with every single hit, and then taking forever to get up. And again, X-Men kind of did the same thing, but why didn't it bother me in that game? It's just a mystery. Let me know in the comments if you can explain it better than I can. I can say that this game is filled with way more cheap hits from off-screen than Mutant Apocalypse had, making it even more annoying to watch your favorite superhero just lay on his back for like 3 or 4 seconds. Plus, some of these levels are just horrible, like this underwater level where you're racing against time while being slowed to a crawl by just being underwater. And before you run to the comments to yell at me, I know that you're supposed to use the bonuses that the Infinity Stones give to offset some of this. But even using those, they don't magically make this game any more fun. Also, while I do think it's cool that you can select whatever character you want for each stage in this one, I just don't think it's done very well. At least with X-Men, each level was designed specifically around that character and their powers. Here it seems like only a few heroes are viable for any given level, especially if you want to explore. I do know this one came out way late for the system, coming out in like 1996 or something, but it still just doesn't quite hit like you'd expect it to. The new superheroes and their expanded movesets are nice additions, but besides that, Capcom just seems like they kind of face-planted with this one. While a Marvel beat-em-up from Capcom based on the Infinity Gauntlet saga seemed like a match made in comic book heaven, sadly this is one that I wouldn't cry over if Thanos snapped it out of existence. I'd say just play Mutant Apocalypse if you want a good Marvel beat-em-up on the Super Nintendo. Guts on the Super NES is one of those games that seems like it would be a good idea, but ends up falling way short of the finish line. You guys remember Guts, right? The game show on Nickelodeon where kids would compete against each other in a bunch of physical events. Now, I wasn't the biggest fan of this when I was a kid, but I do know that it was one of Nickelodeon's more popular shows, since it seemed to be on just about every time you turned that damn channel on. But I will admit that it should make for a good video game. The show had several events that would be perfect in video game form. With the last boss, of course, being the enormous aggro crag that kids would all compete on at the end of the show. And really, that seems like it would make for a decent game. And it seems like the folks over at Viacom, who both developed and published this game, thought so as well, and decided to grace all of us kids with Guts on the Super Nintendo. The back of the box does do a halfway decent job of convincing you that this is the real deal, making sure to hammer home the show's theme that you just don't have guts unless you're playing this game. What you probably won't have, though, will be whatever cash you spent on this and then quickly realize that you wasted it. First off, for as much as I'm about to crap all over this game, it does make a decent first impression, with a complete intro featuring a really great rendition of the show's theme song. I gotta admit that the first time that this came up, it hit me right in the nostalgia box. But the rest of the game? Oh man, I don't even know where to start with this one. I guess let's just go over the events, because even though the game shows 5 events that you can play in, there's only actually 2 as far as what you do. Probably the most normal events are the obstacle courses, where you take some hapless kid and slam them into walls over and over until either the time runs out or you actually make it to the end of the course. Now, this wouldn't be bad on its own, but the controls in these stages are so terrible that it makes it almost impossible to get through these. If you've ever played something like Out of This World or Flashback, where it has very slow and precise movements due to the animations of your character, well, that's what these stages in Guts kinda feel like, except way worse. You somehow feel like your character's stuck in mud while at the same time just launching themselves everywhere at a moment's notice. You have to be lined up perfectly to get anywhere, especially with climbing these poles, since you have to be at a very certain distance to attach to them for some reason. And if you happen to have that jump button held down for just a millisecond too long, that kid's gonna launch themselves right off that pole as soon as they touch it. And this is just using the regular jump. You actually get a long jump as well, and that just makes things so much worse. After a few times of this, I did get a little better, but there were still so many times where I wasn't sure what adventure the controls were going to take me on. The second type of event isn't much better, but at least you kind of get used to it a little. These are the ones where the show would strap kids up to bungee cords and just toss them off of stuff so they can throw a ball into something or spike volleyballs across a net. The first time you play this, though, you'll probably feel just as awkward as those kids did in the show when they were actually doing it. And really, the instructions don't do a good job of explaining this, so I'm gonna try my best here. Okay, so here we go. Get your pen and paper ready, because you're probably gonna need it. Basically, what you need to do is press down on the controller to build up some power. You then need to press left and right to guide this poor kid to the net while holding down one of 3 special move buttons and to hopefully throw the ball at the net, but you may not if you don't press it quick enough. After that, then you need to press down on the D-pad when the kid hits the floor to get them back to the starting point without missing the ledge. Now do all that over and over again in the span of like 5 seconds, and that's what every one of these Bungie events are. Yes, there are 3 separate events that are essentially the exact same besides what you need to throw the ball into. As mentioned, you can kinda get into a flow of doing this, but even then it's awkward at best.
All right.
Unfortunately, the thing that I was looking forward to showing you the most, the aggro crag, is something that I can't show you my own footage of because I'm just not good enough to get to it. You need 700 points to qualify for it, and the best I could do over the course of the show was 600. But going by this footage that I found on YouTube, it unsurprisingly looks like another obstacle course level, just with more platforming sections, which was painful enough in the regular obstacle course levels, so I'm gonna pass on this one. But that's really it for Guts on the Super NES. While I will say that this game does a decent job of representing the show, it's just not very fun. The 2 event types aren't enough for a game like this. It desperately needs at least 2 more to make this feel like a full game. Plus, the 2 types that are in the game are both maddening in their own distinct ways. But if you were a fan of the show and had a friend around back when this came out, then maybe you got some awkward fun out of it. I just don't think there's much of a reason to try and play this one these days though. Unless you really want a bit of that early 90s nostalgia that is here. And as far as Nickelodeon games on the system, I mean, it's not the worst. I mean, trust me, we're gonna get to the worst soon enough. But overall, you'll need more guts just to endure this game than you will having fun. Ren and Stimpy Time Warp for the Super NES is one of the strangest and maybe worst games I've ever played on that system. Now, I'm not going to bore you with what Ren and Stimpy is here. I think everyone watching this video knows just how big of a deal it was. Unfortunately, a lot of its magic has kind of been ruined thanks to its creator, who we will not be mentioning here, but there is no doubt just how big of an impact Ren and Stimpy had on millions of kids, and especially an adolescent me. I was absolutely obsessed with the show, and honestly, it shaped a lot of my own artistic style. But amazingly enough, as obsessed as I was with it, I only ended up playing one Ren and Stimpy game, and it wasn't for the Super Nintendo. So this one's actually new to me, but I've heard that if there's one Ren and Stimpy game worth playing on this system, it's this one, and it might not be for the reasons that you'd think. Unlike some of the other games on this list, Time Warp is actually developed by someone other than Viacom or their minions. This time Sculptured Software stepping up to try to bring the kids on the Super NES a decent Ren and Stimpy game, which all the Ren and Stimpy games released up till this point had not been very good. Now I don't have the time or the sanity to go through the 3 other Ren and Stimpy games on the Super Nintendo, but from what little I played, they all ranged from bad to just plain awful. Buckaroos is a very basic platformer that actually reminds me a lot of the Ren and Stimpy Game Boy game Space Cadet Adventures, and no, that's not a good thing. Vidiots is pretty much more of the same as Buckaroos, but just with different levels, and maybe it's a little less annoying. And Ren and Stimpy Fire Dogs, that one's just a really weird game, since you're exploring a fire station trying to collect stuff for your fire engine while constantly running away from firemen that want to smash you. Again, that's a very quick first impression of these games, but I'm sure you guys can tell me in the comments what I'm missing, because I'm sure I'm missing something. At least I hope I am. Ren and Stimpy Time Warp, though, this one's a little bit different. As soon as you start this one up, you're not playing a platformer. Instead, Time Warp has actually decided to hit you up with a beat-em-up. Which is, I mean, hey, that's fine with me. Beat-em-ups are some of my favorite games out there. So throw Ren and Stimpy to one that even has 2-player co-op in it, and I think you're onto something. But then you start playing it, and my goodness, this is one of the worst beat-em-ups I've ever played. As always, let's give this one its dues first before I tear into it. Sculptured Software has done a great job here of bringing Ren and Stimpy to life on the Super NES. Much, much better than any of the previous games did even. They look exactly like their cartoon counterparts, and they animate really well. There's a ton of gags and throwbacks to what I'm assuming is just about every episode of Ren and Stimpy ever made.
Happy.
They really went above and beyond in trying to cram literally everything into this game that you could look at and say, hey, isn't that from that one Ren and Stimpy episode? Honestly, I think they kind of went a bit overboard with it all, but I mean, it's cool that they put the effort in. So if you just had to look at this game, then I think we'd be in good shape. Unfortunately, you gotta play it. And as soon as you do, you realize what a complete mess this is. Right off the bat, Ren doesn't control very well, but I mean that's the least of your problems. The worst thing about this game is how the game deals with screen depth. Now in most beat-em-ups, you have a section of the screen where you move in and out to line yourself up with a bad guy that you want to punch. You press the button, you punch the guy if he's next to you. It's pretty simple stuff. Time Warp is, I don't know what it's doing. You can be at the bottom of the screen slapping something that's nearly to the top of the screen. But other times you can be right on top of something and completely whiff it no matter how hard you try to hit it. And it's not just attacking things, but you can also take hits from seemingly anywhere just as easy. It makes getting through a lot of these stages feel like you're constantly being assaulted by anything and everything. Most of the time, it's just best to run away from it all, because if you stand around, you're gonna get hit with something. You do get a slew of items that you can use here and there that sit around each stage, like suction cups that are incredibly finicky to use, but allow you to climb walls at least. You can also find a beaver that lets you do whatever's happening here, and Ren's bow from Robin Hood. Stimpy's also occasionally standing around, letting you pick him up and slam him on the ground. But it's kind of hard to activate since you need him to jump and have him land on top of you, and it's just kind of awkward. And finally, you can also pick up a hammer that, as far as I can tell, is literally only used to remove Stimpy's happy helmet that is randomly sitting around the stages. Because yes, this is one of those games that actually has items sitting around that can hurt you. There's even food that can take health away, and that's just mean.
Hey, man.
Oh, and speaking of your health, have you even noticed where your health bar is? Because it took me like 5 minutes to figure out that the colored bricks at the bottom of the screen indicates your health. I mean, I guess A+ for attempted style here, but it can be hard to tell how much health you have left at a glance. And that's literally the only job a health bar has, and they managed to screw that up. And that's just the gameplay. Believe it or not, Time Warp even goes out of its way to completely annoy you with random level goals that the game doesn't even bother to explain. When you first start the game, you get a brief story explaining how Ren and Stimpy need to collect proofs of purchases to obtain this time machine that they want. And as you play through the first couple of stages, you'll pick up these slips of paper that start counting up on the gritty kitty bag that's at the bottom of the screen. You know what the game doesn't tell you though? If you don't collect enough of these by the end of stage 2, it's game over. Literally, the game ends. Nothing tells you how many of these proofs of purchases you need to collect, not even the instructions, because yes, I looked. I actually had to look this up on YouTube to find the answer, and you know what? Hardly anyone has figured it out here either. Someone did narrow it down between 60 and 70 proofs of purchases, but the actual number is 67. You need 67 or more of these things to progress, and that's not the easiest thing to do. Just playing through regularly, I don't think I ended up with more than like 48 of them. But if you do manage to hunt enough of these things down, then you get to play the rest of the game, which all essentially boils down to traveling to various Ren and Stimpy episodes. From a haunted house complete with ghosts and bats, to a zoo where monkeys are throwing poop at you while you have to deal with some of the worst platforming ever put into a game, and finally to the Stone Age where you have to battle with your sanity more than the game to make it through. The game does have some pretty cool looking levels, I will give it that, but it's such a chore to play and endure that it's just not worth it. Now, I mentioned earlier that I only played one Ren and Stimpy game when I was a kid, and that was Stimpy's Invention on the Sega Genesis. And I think out of all the Ren and Stimpy games out there, that's the one to play. It's not perfect, but it's a really good Ren and Stimpy game. And compared to Time Warp, it may as well be a timeless classic. So please, do yourself a favor and stay far away from these Super Nintendo Ren and Stimpy games. These are just pure pain in video game form. It's sad that if you were a fan of Ren and Stimpy and had a Super Nintendo, that this is what you had to deal with. The only thing that these games are good for is making you wish that you had some form of space madness.
Happy
Monsters for the Super NES at least seems like it had a bit more effort put into it than Guts did. Real Monsters is of course based on the show of the same name, where 3 young monsters attend monster school under a city dump so that they can learn how to frighten humans. It was a cool concept for a show and had an absolute all-star cast of actors playing each role, like Tim Curry, Christine Cavanaugh, and even Jim Belushi lending their voices to the characters. I like this one quite a bit, and fans of the show are very vocal about how much they love it. So please don't yell at me too much in the comments for criticizing this game. And that game would hit the Super NES back in 1995, with Viacom hoping that developer Real Time Associates could cash in on those fans with a game featuring their favorite monsters. Just like Guts, the back of the box presents a strong case for it, with some nice graphics, promises of 25 stages, and teaming up to perform monster moves, whatever those are. At least it all sounds on brand. And the look of the game is on brand too, especially each monster. They're all decently well animated, especially when they do their signature scare moves where they all get these super exaggerated looks, and they look just like they do in the show. The rest of the game doesn't look too bad either. It's simple, but the show featured a very simple art style as well. It's just that some of it is repeated a little bit too often, like this stage set in the junkyard, which admittedly did act as a means for the monsters to get into other locations in the cartoon. But unfortunately here, it just seems like a crutch for the developers to not have to draw as many backgrounds. As far as playing those levels though, well, there's some good news and some bad news. Real Monsters is a basic platformer, but it at least tries to mix things up a bit since you can actually choose which monster you want to play as whenever you tap a shoulder button. And amazingly enough, they all feel like their own character. Ickis is probably the one you'll stick with the most since he's the best all-around monster, and his ability to swing everyone across large gaps does come in handy. Oblina's a bit more awkward thanks to her shape, but you're going to need her ability to climb up monsters to reach higher areas a lot. And Crumb, poor Crumb, I think the developers just ran out of ideas for him since not only is he the slowest, but his ability to toss his eye so that you can see areas that you haven't been to yet is situational at best and tedious at worst. While the team-up moves are probably the game's coolest feature, it's also probably the most annoying since you seem to have to be in very specific spots before the move will actually work. Otherwise, everyone just kind of stands around and the game makes an annoying noise at you to inform you that nothing is in fact happening. It seems like each character has to be within range for it to trigger or something. But then there's a lot of times where everyone will just run over whenever you hold the button down. It just seems kind of random at times. And maybe I'm just missing something with this, but whatever I was doing was annoying more than it was fun a lot of the time. Besides your team-up moves, each character can toss trash at enemies that you pick up along the way, as well as monster manuals that add to how many times you can use your screen-clearing scare attack. And while they're fun to use just whenever, it's probably best to save them to use on human bosses, since you can scare them off in no time with them. And you'll probably need to do it anyway, since this is one of those games where you seem to constantly be taking damage from something. Overall though, it's not bad. But one thing I really need to tear apart are these levels. These are just really badly designed. I've never been the biggest fan of these giant explorable stages in a platform game, since a lot of them kind of come off more as like large mazes than actual levels to me. And Real Monsters is some of the worst in that category I've seen. I get that people like to explore, but these levels just sprawl endlessly for no reason other than to pad their length since they're all ridiculously long. You do at least get arrows that point you along the way, but it still feels more like you're going past the same few sections over and over and over again. It's not a deal breaker, but I can tell you right now that if you're not a fan of this kind of level design, then you're not gonna like this game. But if you can get used to it, then I think you might have some fun with this one. It's not the most refined platform game ever made since there's more than enough jank all over the place, like cheap hits, awkward hitboxes, and like I said, some of the worst level design I've ever seen in a game. But for a Viacom Nickelodeon game, it's not half bad. And after dealing with Guts, I'll take not half bad over soul-crushingly awful any day of the week. And for fans of Real Monsters, I can imagine quite a few kids had fun with this one back in the day. It represents the show pretty well and the gameplay is at least tolerable. So if you're looking to get some scares of your own in, then you could do a lot worse than running around with these monsters on the Super Nintendo.
Ready?
Rocko's Modern Life, Spunky's Dangerous Day for the Super Nintendo is probably the game that had the most unique take on translating the show into a video game. First off, just because I was a fan of the various Nicktoons as a kid didn't mean that I looked forward to every one of them. For every Ren and Stimpy or Angry Beavers, there was a Doug, and the show that this game is based on, Rocko's Modern Life. I just never much cared for neither the art style of the show or the over-the-top humor. I realize that's odd coming from a kid that would sit for hours and watch Ren and Stimpy fart on each other, but Rocko always felt like its humor was aimed more at like 6-year-olds or something, rather than my refined 12-year-old kid gross-out humor. But even still, I ended up giving this one a shot when I saw it sitting on my video store's shelf, since I'd usually grab just about any game that had a character that I knew from TV on the front of the box. Yes, I was one of those kids. The back of the box doesn't look too bad, and Rocko's Modern Life is actually the very first game Viacom would develop for Nickelodeon. So let's see if they started off better than how they ended. Just like a lot of their games on the Super NES, it looks pretty good at first blush. It's bright, colorful, and the characters all look really good, which is amazing considering what the developers had to work with at the time, but we'll get to that in a minute. Even the little cutscenes before each level's pretty good, featuring actual voice clips. So all in all, not too bad, and I think that's what Viacom was best at. It seems like they really went hard on making sure that all of their games, whether they published or developed them, really resembled the show first and foremost. But as usual with their games, things are a bit mixed gameplay-wise. While you might think that Rocko's Modern Life would go for a more standard platform game like Real Monsters, it's instead decided to take parts of a platformer and then combine it with something like Lemmings. Since you're not trying to get to the end of the stage, but instead escorting Rocko's dog Spunky to the end. By doing stuff like moving platforms around, using items to manipulate how Spunky moves, and in general just keeping him out of harm's way. It's an interesting idea and one that could actually be a lot of fun if done properly. Unfortunately, as usual with Viacom, the execution of that idea is not as good as it could be. But let's start off with Rocko himself, since he's essentially acting as the player's hand in this game. You need him to be quick and accurate with everything he does. But he ends up being one of the most awkward to control characters out of just about all of these Nickelodeon games. He slides around like he's on ice most of the time, making accurate jumps and simply positioning himself in a particular spot, which I may add you need to do a lot in this game, an absolute chore. Thankfully, Rocko himself doesn't take any damage, he just kind of flinches for a second. But just getting him around feels like you're constantly slipping and sliding all over the place. And it's not like Spunky moves very fast, but when you're continually running into things, missing jumps, and whiffing enemies, it really makes it seem like you only have like a few seconds to get everything right. And I mean, maybe that was the point. But if it was, then maybe make a different kind of game instead of one long escort mission where precision timing and movement is required from something that controls this badly. It also doesn't help that a lot of the things you need to manipulate for Spunky doesn't quite work the way you'd think it does. Some platforms go down, some platforms go up. Some things don't work until you step off of it and then step back on. Some things have to be in a certain orientation. These are all things you need to constantly worry about on top of this game being visually dense, making it hard to just kind of make out what you need to manipulate at times. Like take for instance these water hoses that look more like they're part of the background. I didn't even notice these the first time I was playing this, and you have to step on them just right to activate them. It's a challenge just trying to make out what the game wants you to do at times, since there's just so much stuff on the screen. Thankfully, you can pause the game to move the camera around to see what's coming up, but sometimes you just don't know how something's going to react until you or Spunky touches it. This is one of those games where I wish it could have had a lot more refinement done to it before it hit shelves, which is apparently a luxury that the game's developers didn't have since it was actually being made alongside of the show before it even aired. The developers didn't even have reference material for the characters besides concept art to make the game with, so I will give them credit for somehow making something this playable with so little to go on. And I do remember this game getting decent reviews at the time, which is one reason why I rented it back in the day, and I ended up hating it. So I was hoping that maybe going back to it for this review, I could appreciate it a little bit more. But I think I've just come to the conclusion that me and this game don't vibe. But if you're a huge Rocko fan and somehow never played the Super Nintendo release, well, maybe you'll like it more than I do. It at least looks really good, and it's got some of the show's trademark humor from what the developers had time to put in. And if you can just get past all of my complaints, or if you just think I'm whining, then I think you'll enjoy this one. Especially if you like games like Lemmings or The Lost Vikings. But as for me and Rocko's modern life on the Super Nintendo, I'll probably just do like I did when I was a kid and hope that something better is coming up next. And I think that's gonna do it. I mean, that is a lot of games, so hopefully everyone is caught up now. It's kind of crazy though, because you don't realize just how much work went into all these until you see them just laid out back to back like that. And trust me, it takes a lot of free time to make these. And that's something I need just a little bit more of to finish up the next two videos, which are gonna be the Super Star Wars trilogy, with next week's video covering the NES Star Wars games and then Super Star Wars itself, and then closing out with Super Empire Strikes Back and Super Return of the Jedi. These are some of my favorite games ever, so I just really wanted to make sure I got them right. But I can't thank all of you guys enough that stuck around for this marathon special of Super NES games, and be sure to check back next week for some of that hot Star Wars action. But until then, thanks for watching.